The times are changing for landlords and property owners. You are more than likely breaking laws you didn't even know existed, and there's real consequences for that. If your tenant reports a maintenance issue and you don't fix it in time, and who determines that time is unclear, that's harassment. So not only do we manage the property, we advocate on your guys' behalf. This is me at the city council talking against some of these ordinances that we're about to talk about. You see the people behind me, those are the people that are actively working against landlords. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come. What we're going to talk about is extremely relevant if you are a landlord, specifically in the city of Ventura, but a lot of this stuff applies countywide as well. The times are changing for landlords and property owners. So we're going to kind of get into that. So let's just jump into it. We don't want to take up all the time with the slideshow. I want to leave time at the end for some questions and answers. But I do appreciate everybody taking time out of their day. So I'm Peter, Kenya, Austin. We're here to answer questions. Don't be shy about hitting us up if you need anything at all. So we're Rincon Property Management, which is residential property management. But more importantly than that, what I believe in, what the company believes in, is educating our clients and the people, landlords in the market. Because if you don't stay on top of the changes, you will inadvertently be breaking laws you don't even know you're breaking, which is a huge, huge risk for anybody who owns rental property. So not only do we manage the property, we advocate on your guys' behalf. This is me at the city council talking against some of these ordinances that we're about to talk about. You see the people behind me, those are the people that are actively working against landlords and who are trying to pass things that are very bad for landlords, which we'll get into some of that stuff. Okay, so I think it's important to talk about the key stakeholders in these negotiations, if you will. There's, in my opinion, 4 parties. So you have the property owners and the landlords, there's a decent representation here. We have the tenant advocacy groups, which I don't believe they're here. Mainly CAUSE, which stands for Central Coast something or another, but they are very aggressive, very organized, very effective, and they are behind a lot of these measures that keep coming up in front of these government councils. And then to some extent, there are some tenant unions. There's a Ventura tenant union that's around that also advocates for these kinds of things. And then you have what I call property owner advocacy groups. Think California Association of Realtors, our local Ventura County Coastal Association of Realtors, property management companies. There was probably 6 or 7 owners of management companies advocating on behalf of landlords throughout this whole negotiation process. And then the final stakeholder, which is irritating, is the City of Ventura itself, specifically the staff at the city, because they push an agenda, kind of an undertone behind the scenes agenda, which is not friendly to landlords. Sometimes they run against what the city council even tells them to do. But it's important to understand who the players are in these negotiations. So moving on, we didn't just get here overnight. This has been happening for a while. We are not here to get political or take, right versus left. This is merely, let's educate you guys on what's happening. So in California, we have a one-party control, and that party loves tenant protections, rent control, regulation. Right or wrong, it doesn't really matter, but they are the ones that are passing these laws. Now, when COVID hit, obviously that turned a lot of stuff upside down. It accelerated all of this. It pushed us way farther down the field for these things than if COVID had never happened. But we are here. In 2019, literally right before COVID hit, the first statewide rent control bill passed. It was Assembly Bill 1482. You guys should know about this or have heard about it because it's been with us for 5-6 years now. It didn't really have a lot of teeth in it, and for the most part, a lot of people ignored it. So the state didn't take kindly to that, so they came out in 2023 with Senate Bill 567, which is like the new and improved 1482 with teeth behind it, with criminal charges, penalties, a lot of bad things for landlords. In addition to that, a ton of state laws that affect a lot of different things that you do as a landlord. We're not going to talk about all of them today because we'd be here for 5 hours, but just know that they're there. And if you have questions, reach out to us. We are happy to help guide you through this process. So That was all state level stuff. In fact, during COVID, the federal government got involved in preventing, what's that? Oh, gotcha. So the federal government even got involved in it during COVID, but for the most part, the state is the one who pushes a lot of this stuff. And now the cities are like, hey, what about us? So they start following. Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Ojai, they have all layered on their own tenant protection measures. So we've got some folks with property in Oxnard here. This is nothing new to them. Those have been in place for, I think, 2 years now. So that's what we're trying to prevent in Ventura. We don't want Ventura doing what Oxnard did. Ojai basically followed Oxnard. Santa Barbara is a whole nother animal. They are 10 times worse than anything we have here. We want to prevent becoming Santa Barbara for sure. So Ventura's followed track with them, and these organizations are, they're championing it every step of the way. So the first thing that the city of Ventura did specifically is in 2022, they passed a just cause evictions for demolition and substantial remodel. I don't know who remembers this, but there was a case. I don't remember all the specific details. I think it was on the Avenue. It was an apartment complex where they vacated the tenants. The tenants revolted. I think that might have been the genesis for the tenant unions. I see Brian nodding his head. That might be. The city of Ventura responded and said, you can't, if you're going to renovate your house or your rental property, you have to follow this new law. And essentially, there's a lot of details to it, and Senate 567 kind of replaced some of those. But you now have to pay 2 months' rent for your tenant to move out if you're going to do this. This was just the first stab that Ventura took at their own regulations. Luckily, it was literally just if you were going to remodel the property and have to kick the tenants out. So that was the first time. This is in here. So there's something called a housing element. This is like a framework from the state that they dump on the cities, not just Ventura, pretty much all the cities in Ventura and the municipalities. And what it says is, and I'm paraphrasing grossly here, we have a housing shortage. There's a housing issue. It's a real problem. This is the state saying, hey, you guys better get it together. Here's some framework for what you guys need to do. And in that framework, most of it is not about tenant protections. It's about zoning and how many affordable units, those types of things. But there is a portion of it that says we don't want tenants to be evicted, so maybe put some of these tenant protection things in place. Now, not every city bites on this and goes, okay, we're going to do that. I mean, you still have to have the political will to do it, and a lot of cities just refuse to. Unfortunately, our city's not one of those. So what our city did was they're basically using this as political cover. Like, we have to do this because the housing element from the state is telling us we have to address these things. So mid-2024, the staff came out and said, hey, we're trying to fulfill this housing element. Here's 7 things that we think we need to do so that we can fulfill it. Cue landlords, VCCAR, management companies, everybody going, oh no, this is like the worst case scenario. So for the most part, the people on our side kind of united and went to work at trying to slow these down and or defeat them. So these first 7 things weren't actual ordinances that the city came through with. They basically said to the council, we need to look at these things. Tell us if we're good to look at these things or not. I was at that council meeting with a lot of people that are in this room here. And basically, we had luck, through our efforts, we were able to shoot down right away 4 out of the 7. And those would be 4 of the worst ones for you. I'll just go through these. One was a rental registry. This is where you have to tell the city that you have a rental property, how much you rent it for, who you are, tenants' information, and you have to pay a fee so you can pay them to do this to you. Very bad for landlords. Security deposit ordinance, they were trying to make it, again, there was not details because these were just concepts at the beginning. They basically want to make it to where they're going to regulate how you return a deposit, how much you can charge for a deposit. At the same time they were doing this, the state passed its own security deposit law, so this one was completely redundant. The third one was a tenant's right to purchase, which personally was like, I have a big issue with this, but if you as a landlord say, you know what, I'm done being a landlord, I'm going to sell my property, well, you had to offer it to your tenant first, and they were going to basically tie it up for a period of time, which is completely unacceptable in my opinion. Displacement assistance is if you are going to displace your tenant, because there are reasons that you can displace your tenant, they wanted you to pay more than the state was going to make you pay. And then rent stabilization ordinance, this is the one that Oxnard has that they were trying to bring here, is the state law already lets you raise your rents roughly 7 to 8% if you're subject to the law. They wanted to make that more restrictive. So Oxnard is 4%. So this is a really, really bad one for landlords. The sixth one was legal services. The extreme form of this is the city would pay an attorney for your tenant to sue you if you're trying to evict them. Really bad for landlords. That's not where it ended up, and this is one that we're probably going to get stuck with, but we'll go into detail about that. And then the last one was an anti-harassment ordinance, which is the one that we really actually need help from everybody here still. It's not set in stone, but we're in the process of that. So that was where they started. Through all of our efforts, and a lot of the people in this room too, we were able, like I said, to get rid of the rental registry, get rid of the security deposit ordinance, the right to purchase, and the rent stabilization, which left us with displacement assistant, legal services, and anti-harassment. We went to work on all three of these, and we've made successes over time. It wasn't all at the same time. So we were successful in just eliminating the displacement assistance. Just to give you an idea of what they were trying to do, they basically wanted to pay 2 months rent for a regular displacement if you were going to displace your tenant. And then if your tenant belonged to any of these classes, you were going to have to pay them even more. And the class was, if you're over 62, if you have children, if you're disabled, what was one of the other? Forget the other one, but they basically, it would have carved out like the majority of the population, which was ridiculous because if somebody needs assistance, it needs to be need-based because, you know, I have kids. Does that mean I'm going to be homeless if I get evicted? Probably not. So luckily we were successful in just getting that one wiped off the table. So now we just have legal services and education and harassment. So legal services and education, we were successful in watering down. So the city has a contract with an organization called the HRC, or Housing Rights Center, I believe. And basically it's like informational mediation, education of landlords and property owners. There's no teeth behind it. It doesn't really impact anybody really. So what they did basically is they enhanced the contract with them. So they're going to pay them $500,000 over 3 or 4 years to continue to do what they do, which is basically nothing, which it's definitely a waste of money, but as far as from our perspective, it's not really going to affect your business and make things really difficult for you. So that one is coming. In fact, we just, VCCAR just won at the Planning Commission 2 days ago. They're going to be the ones that do a lot of the education. The city was trying to bring in some people from LA to do it, which didn't make a lot of sense to anybody. Okay, that leaves us with anti-harassment, which is the whole reason we're here today, because this is the one that, in my opinion, is the biggest problem for landlords. They just released, so the city put out their draft ordinance months ago. We went, and went to the meetings, and the way they do it is weird. It goes through 3 different groups. It goes to the Planning Commission, then it goes to the Housing and Homeless Subcommittee, and then it goes to the City Council. Well, we were able to tie it up in the Housing Homeless Subcommittee, so we brought our objections to it, and they sent it back to get rewritten with a lot of the feedback. They also did a workshop where they put, in a room no different than this, all of the players that are there. So we were literally there with CAUSE and the unions, and it was not a fun meeting because it was a very, very contentious. Like these organizations, they're not opposed to yelling, screaming, name calling. Like it's not a civil process, I'll just say. So they took all that workshop feedback and then they put that into another draft ordinance, which they just released a couple days ago at the Planning Commission, which I was at that meeting along with some people here. And the Planning Commission basically said, this ordinance makes no sense. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It could be interpreted 15 different ways. So they sent it back for another redo, which is good for us. But the structural problems of the ordinance is, number one, the definition. So, and by the way, we are happy to send you guys copies of this. I didn't want to print out hundreds of pages for obvious reasons, but they define harassment as if you don't have a lawful purpose of doing something to your tenant, essentially they're going to call that harassment. And then they specifically identified like A through P things that could be considered harassment. Some of the more egregious ones were if your tenant reports a maintenance issue and you don't fix it in time, and who determines that time is unclear, that's harassment. Or if you don't allow them to pay with certain forms of payment, that could be considered harassment. So there's a lot of problems for a landlord with this, because you have to be able to run your business. You have to be able to be a landlord and conduct business. If somebody's going to categorize what you're doing as harassment, that's really bad for you, and we'll get into why. One, they can use it now as an affirmative defense in an eviction. So they can block your eviction if they can claim that you harassed them via this ordinance and what it says harassment is. There's two, like the teeth behind the ordinance are civil penalties and administrative penalties. So civil penalties, they got to take you to Superior Court, get a lawyer, and sue you. What it allows for is $2,000 to $10,000 per day, up to 30 days. No clarity on what constitutes a $2,000 fine versus a $10,000 fine, or how the fine's levied or when. Just it's pretty vague. So that's an issue. The other one, which in my opinion is worse, because the reality is for someone to go hire a lawyer to sue you for a $2,000 harassment, probably going to be an uphill battle because it's going to be really expensive, and they have to have the money, which is difficult for some people. The worst one, in my opinion, is the administrative penalties. These are city-levied fines against you that the city keeps. This money doesn't go back to the tenants. But the first offense is $500, $1,000 for the second, $1,500 for the third. Again, no process behind this. No, is a complaint made? Is the owner notified? Is there like this process that you go through? It's literally like two sentences in the ordinance. That's what the Planning Commission had a problem with. Like, hey, this is basically garbage. Like, how is anybody gonna make sense of this? So that's the anti-harassment ordinance in a nutshell. And I'm sure you'll have questions, which we're happy to take at the end. One other thing I wanted to note is when I said the city staff sometimes works against this process, this is a perfect example. This week, the City of Ventura just finalized their general plan, which is a planning document they use for not just housing, but all kinds of things in the city. The city staff snuck back in the tenant protections so that future councils can go, oh, we're just following the general plan. The general plan says we need to do tenant protection things. So we went through rigmarole with them, and we were successful at the council meeting in getting them to amend it and get rid of those tenant protections in the plan. So that is a big win that we were able to accomplish. So the reality is what does this mean for you as a landlord? What do you have to do, or for your clients that you're working with? It boils down to you need to educate yourself or educate your clients. If you don't stay on top of this stuff, you are more than likely breaking laws you didn't even know existed, and there's real consequences for that. So this is not the same business that it was 10 years ago at all. It's a completely different business. The rules have essentially changed on us. So if you haven't updated your leases and your paperwork in a couple of years, guaranteed you're breaking laws you don't even know. So if that's the case, take some time, update your rental agreements. Even if you've had a tenant in there for 10 years, do a renewal, get yourself compliant. Otherwise, you're going to get hurt. Quick story, we had a lot of people bring problems to us that we helped them unwind, and we had somebody that needed to do an eviction. They brought it to us. We, got our eviction attorney involved, and they had never disclosed the Assembly Bill 1482 or 567 to their tenants. The eviction can't even proceed. They have to then make the disclosures months down the road before you can actually do the eviction. So if you guys know that and you haven't disclosed, let us know. We'll help you disclose. It's not rocket science. The disclosures are pretty easy, but it's that one little step. If you don't do it, you're literally screwing yourself if you get into trouble. So the other thing that is important, that was less important 10, 20 years ago, is you have to treat your activities as a landlord like an actual business, because believe it or not, you are in business. A lot of our clients are mom and pop landlords. They own one or two properties. They don't view it as a business, but the reality is you're exposed to the same liability and risks that the 300-unit corporate-owned apartment complex is exposed to. And if you ever get taken in front of a judge, You can't tell the judge, well, I just have one rental property. I didn't really know. That is not a defense against a problem. So you got to treat it like a business. And if you don't have the time to do all this stuff, because I'm here to tell you that to do what we're outlining here is very time consuming. Trying to stay on top of all the new laws is a full-time job in itself. If you don't have the capacity or the will, because I don't know who in their right mind would really enjoy this stuff, you should reach out to a professional, whether it's a property management company or an attorney to redo your leases, or at a minimum, join some of the landlord associations. The California Apartment Association is one of them, so that you can leverage their expertise to keep you compliant. That's what this boils down to. You have to stay on top of this stuff. So what's next for this ordinance and where we really need assistance is it's going back to the Planning Commission, then the Housing Committee, and then the Council. We have the opportunity to mold it. I mean, we have the opportunity to stop it. I don't know if we're going to be able to get this one thrown out. I think this one has legs, but what we need to do is help modify it so it's palatable for landlords, so it doesn't prevent you from doing your job as a landlord. And the way you do that, call your council member, email them, go to the council meetings and speak. It's not the first thing anybody would ever want to do in their spare time, but it absolutely makes a difference. The reason it's important more now than ever is now we have these tenant groups that are out there, and I guarantee you they are doing this regularly. In fact, when I was at the Planning Commission, one of the commissioners had to excuse himself, and when he came back in, he's like, I forgot to explain why I had to excuse myself. He is employed by cause. So they basically got one of their people on the Planning Commission, which is really bad for landlords, right? Because they literally have people on the committees that make decisions regarding this stuff. So they're not going away. In fact, if anything, they're gaining more steam and they're getting more empowered. We have to counteract on the other side. Otherwise, we're going to end up like a Santa Barbara, like an Oakland or in Los Angeles, where this stuff is so onerous that landlords are fleeing. They're selling their properties and buying in Texas or Florida or other places. We are not anywhere near as bad as those places now. And, hopefully with all of our efforts, we won't get there. So that's pretty much the presentation. We're committed to keeping the people that we work with and that are in our sphere updated and letting you guys know, what's going on and more importantly, what you can do to help. Yeah, so if you're working with us, all of our stuff's compliant. Yeah, we got it. That's the benefit of working with the management company. We have you covered on that. You're good. Yeah. Well, first off, there is such thing as a lease ending, but not a lease ending where you have to move. Because in the old days, you used to go, sorry, the lease is up on October 1st, we're not renewing it, you got to go. That doesn't exist if you live in a property that's subject to 1482 and 567. You can move tenants out, but it has to be, I think there's 4 approved reasons only. Moving a family back in, substantial remodel like the property's condemned. What are the other ones?
And if you move a family member in, there's a certain, I want to say it's 30 days that they have to. It has to be an immediate family member. If you do a remodel, you have to show proof of permits being pulled, that it's actually a major thing, not just painting the place.
The other one is removing the unit from the rental market. And typically selling it does not qualify because you're technically not removing it. But that's a little bit of a gray area. In the beginnings of the laws, they talk about who it applies to and who it doesn't. What type of property do you have? Okay, so they're all individually owned, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those typically are exempt from 1482 and 567. Yeah. Exempt, yeah, but only if you do the proper notifications. You have to disclose to the tenants about the exemption, which is a part of the law, which if it hasn't happened already, you're technically breaking the law, but it's not something you can't fix. The second a big fire happens, the governor will typically declare a state of emergency, and that enacts these anti-price gouging laws, not just for housing, but for everything. Well, and then they use these as political, the state of emergency is a political issue. Even the emergency was a year ago, they could have it still in place. So which basically means you can't raise rents any more than 10% on what they were before the emergency happened. Well, when all those houses burned to the ground, all these people are displaced. Fingers crossed they all have insurance coverage. Well, the insurance is going to basically help put them up in a rental property. Well, there's a crazy amount of competition for rental, a limited supply of rentals, so the laws of supply and demand are the price goes up, right? Well, the anti-price gouging law doesn't allow it, but the insurance company will come in regardless and say, oh, it's a $3,000 rental, we'll pay $6,000. Well, you as a landlord, if you accept that, you're putting yourself a little bit at risk of breaking that law, which is not where you want to be, because especially after the Palisades fires, the Attorney General, everybody was going crazy trying to go after landlords. So that's what I'm getting at. If you're going to do this, you have to stay on top of it, because there's so many landmines that you have to navigate. There are specialty insurance products, one of which we provide to our clients if they want them, that provide against, they provide protection for eviction, like coverage of the legal cost and lost rent up to a certain amount of time. Like it's not going to pay out 2 years of lost rent, but if there are specialty policies for that, but they're not common. Like your landlord policy on your property does not cover if you have to evict your tenant. If you could have some lost rent coverage if you had like a major incident there, like a flood and they got displaced and you didn't, there's coverage sometimes for that, but typically an eviction under a normal landlord policy, not covered. It all boils down to the same thing: is you have to treat what you're doing as a business, because it is. And the second you don't do that, that's when you hear horror stories of tenant destroyed the entire house, didn't pay for a year, and now I'm going bankrupt.